guess I'm kind of curious, like what's next, you know, in terms of art. So just continuing to look, I think the what is it? Electron microscope?
Scanning electron microscope.
Scanning electron microscope, SEM.
SEM.
So that's kind of probably the next steps as it relates to this project and continuing to.
It would be great to get samples that are then protected from contamination. You know, we'll have to see about that. Obviously, you just don't go take stuff, right? But it's possible maybe to get some very small fragments with permission and then get them looked at and have them be protected so that nobody's handling it. It doesn't get cleaned, you know, it doesn't get washed or rinsed or anything, and then take it and look at it and see like what's on this. You know, basically trying to look at it exactly as it was from beneath the step pyramid or whatever. That would be awesome.
Comparing. So doing the comparison work to other stuff.
Comparison to rough stone. Of the same material. I mean, Ben, do we know where they got this stuff? I mean, where did they get this?
Yeah, so various different spots with quarries. Yeah, I don't know. That's one of the big questions about that in the pre-dynastic time is like there was such an array of like semi-exotic stone types that came from this area. It almost, there's a whole problem around trade. Like, you know, you find things like, you know, there's a lapis lazuli tube that's in a pre-dynastic section in the Egyptian Museum next to bone and bead ornaments, you know.
With the gold.
The gold tip on it. I've actually found another one. I think there was another one I found in the a pre-dynastic section in the British Museum, but it's like there's no source for lapis in Egypt. The closest source for lapis, as far as we know, is, you know, Afghanistan. So where are these stone types coming from? How are they getting their hands on such high-quality pieces of stone? A lot of the times, you know, these aren't made from blocks of stone that you just find laying around on the surface. There's a quarrying process involved with all of this. So there's all sorts of issues with that. But I would like to compare it to natural parts of the stone and then worked stone to see like what does it actually look like when it's machined with a copper tube or it's like a modern lathe. And, you know, I think you'd still see those metal fragments there.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, something I'd like to get into. And plus, I'm not an expert in scanning electron microscopy. But it's I need, you know, I want to learn more about it and, you know, see what we can glean from the elemental composition. It's just an interesting avenue. I think with the vase scan project in general, I think a continuing goal is to expand the data set of analysis. You've done a huge part in that. But, you know, ultimately the goal is to get into museums. And you know, there's been a bit of progress with Egyptian institutions working with museums that are interested in this process. That they're looking at getting access to start scanning and doing some analysis work on those vessels. There are museums, a lot of them are already scanning artifacts, but usually just with LiDAR for things like 3D online displays to get this models. It'd be nice to scan them with things like structured light so you have a little more depth to it, and then the scans could be analyzed. I think it works really well from a digital preservation perspective as well, so you could, you know, you're quite literally digitally preserving that item forever should something ever happen to it with that process. So I think it is beneficial for the museums as well to do that. And
if you can get like a LiDAR point cloud plus the photogrammetry, like the texture, you know, the imagery for it as well, and then you've like really preserved it, the higher resolution too. So
let's talk about museums for a second, because there's a couple of comments on museums. One is that I've had a couple of people comment on my collection that are like, that should be in a museum, and I'm pissed off because that should be in a museum, and it's like, you know, that's fine. I think ultimately it would be cool to actually put these into a museum and have a lot of people, you know, go check them out. But what I'm interested in is figuring out how they were made. You know, first off, how were these things made? Which is obviously what we're all kind of working on here. But but then like which ones are real and which ones aren't real? Because even in a museum, like which ones are modern and which ones are ancient? Because even in a museum, you're going to have stuff that's potentially modern. Like, and I just learned this because it just from like comment sections on YouTube or whatever, like there's I think it's the Cairo Museum. There's one of these artifacts that has the gold handles and it's round and it's sitting on a tip and it's like perfectly balanced. And I went and looked it up and it's like I'm using it as an example of, hey, here's a museum piece that's really freaking precise and it looks incredible and it's just like a lot of what we have in this room. And the comment was, well, it's from its provenance is 1924, and it doesn't have archaeological context. It was donated by the owner in 1924 to the Cairo Museum, and so. So for me, it's like, well, what is it then? If museums pieces aren't good enough from 1924, then what's good enough? And it's almost like what you guys have here, which is directly from the step pyramid, is even better than what we can find in museums. So, I mean, to see that stuff kind of get
That's true.
analyzed. I mean, museums are great, and we got to go to museums, and we got to try to kind of work with them. But then, like, understanding of the pieces that we're looking at from museums. What's their history? Where did they come from? Was a private collection in 1924 or in 1880 or whenever it was donated? What was the technology? Was anybody making these at that point in time that could have been faked?
So and that's a good point. I didn't know that. I think I know that actually explains some things. If it's that big round one with the gold hand, I know the one. It's one of my favorite pieces. They keep moving it. And they keep hiding it. Like I had to go find it, and it's like literally in an off limits area that I just walked into. On a dusty shelf somewhere now, and maybe it's because there isn't provenance attached to it. And when I say we want to get into museums, it is primarily, well, A, to expand the data set, but B, to like get access to vessels with like impeccable provenance, the ones that have been, okay, Jean-Philippe Loyer found this thing, came from his collection during his excavations at Saqqara. That's pretty impeccable. Like if those types of artifacts that, like, Flinders Petrie found this thing or whatever. Those are the ones you want to look at, just to address the provenance issue. I personally, for the same reasons you mentioned, technologically speaking, I don't think it's such a big issue with provenance. I mean, I know people that don't like the results. They're going to question provenance, and I think it's legitimate to ask the question about provenance. But I think for those exact reasons you mentioned, like in the 1920s, even in the 1980s, because I know there's I think the OG vase goes back to about the 1980s. I mean, some of yours I know go back to the 1960s. It's like, who is doing this level of precision machining in that time? And even in the 1980s, it's questionable that you would be able to do that. I mean, we know that today I'm sure it's possible. It would be insanely expensive. It would take a lot of machine time with a very sophisticated machine, with an expert operator. You probably burn through a bunch of tooltips trying to do it because it is very hard material. And I'm not sure you're going to get a return on the investment if you're just trying to sell this as a fake artifact on an antiquities market. That idea gets compounded when you go back to like the 1980s or the 1960s, because these things weren't really worth anything back then, not relative to today, certainly. I mean, people have always been interested in statuary, artifacts with writing on them and hieroglyphs, and these vessels are like they're plain, they don't have decoration on them. I mean, sure, they've had a value, but it hasn't been significant. I don't think you'd ever be able to do it for the price to make a money in the 80s or in the 60s on an antiquities market, unless someone's insisting, well, it's a 50-year practical joke. Somebody made it in the 80s in the hope that this would happen at some point in the future when they get analysed, and I put a video out and somehow drive the price up of these things all around the world. I should have bought one. I never did.
Terrible grifter.
Terrible grifter. Yeah, I'm very bad at it. You
got to work on that, Ben.
Or a terrible Metallica. What was it?
Oh, a roadie from Metallica. Terrible roadie from Metallica. Yeah.
It's just terrible in general.
Yeah. We got a roadie from Metallica to tell you all about it. Yeah,
what was that from?
Andrew Schultz. I was on the Flagrant podcast, and it's like, well, he asked me before the podcast. He's like, well, what do you call yourself? And I'm like, well, I'm a YouTuber or an independent researcher or whatever. He's like, oh, that's boring. I'm like, well, kind of, you're the comedian. You figure it out. He did. Made me laugh. He's like, yeah, everything you know about history is wrong. We've got a roadie from Metallica to tell you about. Can you tell? Great. I like it. Yeah. It shows, I guess. But yeah, I don't see it as big of as the provenance issue as a big of a deal as some people do. There's also the form matching, right? So a lot of how stuff does get dated, and this is a known archaeological technique, is by matching form and stone type and even wear and things like that to known design types during it. It's contextual dating, and that happens a lot. And these artifacts we're looking at and that we have looked at match all of those things. They match the form. Like there's replicas. They look not replicas, but they look exactly the same. They show wear. They're the right stone type. They match on all these other levels. You're just not always going to have provenance. It's the nature of antiquities, right?
This is another reason why I think in some cases finding out where this stone comes from can be important. Some of the time, like we were saying earlier, some of it is not. It's not really known. Where's the quarry? What's the source?
Yeah.
All of this stone has a signature that, there's diorite all over the world, but you can figure out exactly where this came from if you have the right data. And so like one of the things we did last time we were in Egypt, we were trying to find out where did they get the basalt, because they've used this basalt stone in a lot of the Old Kingdom sites as paving, as blocks for walls. And the question is like, where did it come from? So there's at least one supposed quarry way out in the desert, and we went out to try to find it and look at it. And it was very interesting to see, like, okay, so this may be the source of some of the basalt that they have at some of the sites. And being out there and looking at the material, because, where the basalt itself is way up on a plateau, and it's been crumbling down into the desert for however millions of years. So we're looking at the blocks and seeing the quality and the kind of the texture, the nature of the stone. And then a couple of weeks later, we're back on a site with basalt, and you start to recognize, like, oh yeah, this does kind of look like what we were seeing out there, right? It's similar. Now, obviously, that's not a scientific identification, but it would be interesting to know, like, what, some of these that might be are, supposed to be 6,000-7,000 years old, and yet the source for the stone is really, really far away, like way outside of Egypt. And then you have to start thinking about trade routes. Who brought this block of material to Egypt so that they could make this jar out of it? Some of that is interesting. Like, I would like to know where these stone types came from.
Yeah, they all have a story.
Yeah.
It's all a unique story.
Exactly.
It's like you could rack your brain. I have to just try to kind of like push that part of it aside, because it's so cool. They all, different stone, different places, different history, and I'm never going to know any of it.
Yeah. and they are all different. Yeah, like as Russ said, not all granite's created equally. I know it's one of the takeaways that Chris Dunn made with his book. I mean, originally he had talked about potential piezoelectric capability, like properties of Aswanian granite in his theories around the pyramid, and he had to back off on that because he found out that particular type of Aswanian granite actually has a very low quartz content relative to other types of granite. It's like 15% or something, whereas some other types of granite have way more quartz content. So yeah, it's not all stone is created equally. I mean, these two pieces here, they're both salt and pepper diorite, but you can pretty clearly see it's a different composition and type of stone. Who knows where they came from? I don't know. It's an endless question about where these materials came from.
But what if we find out that, for example, I know this is wild speculation here, but one of that, you only can get that from Peru.
Right.
Yeah. And then you're like, okay, hold on a second.
Yeah.
How did they make even if it's only 4,000 BC, how did they get a Peruvian piece of diorite?
Yeah. I that's what I was talking about with the different stone types, particularly in these vessels. I mean, there's hundreds of stone types. It's like there seems to be some indication that there might have been a system of trade going on whenever these things were sourced.
Yeah.
I don't think that was necessarily the first and second dynasty of the Old Kingdom, or even the few thousand years before that. I don't know how to explain it. But
all right, so when were they?
Well, okay. This is a long answer. I mean, so my window of possibility that I put this in. So I think you have the same problem just by saying, okay, these vessels are pre-dynastic. Okay, I think you run into the same problem that you do when you look at them in the context of, well, they're dynastic or they're early dynastic, in that you're finding them in these primitive burials. You're finding them in the possession of a people who buried their dead in a fetal position in a shallow grave. They were making, handmade pottery that's rough. They had bone and beads. There is no indication that they had any capability to do this type of stonework at that time. We're just talking back to like 15,000 years ago. There's everything else that we know about them suggests they didn't have the capability to finish extremely hard stone like this, get it thin, all the aspects that we see about the vases. Same thing's true in the early dynastic period. Like, they say, really what people think of as Old Kingdom Egypt really started in the third dynasty. It's the third and fourth dynasty, the most famous, but because before that, there's no real building. There's no statuary. It's the first and second dynasty. And I know this was like, Barakat had to try to explain it in one of the bits of literature about on one of your vases. It's like, it's really interesting because we've dated this vase to the first and second dynasty to note that this seems to have been the only advanced form of stonework happening during that period. I'm like, well, is that really the case? If they could make these vessels, they're probably going to do statues. They're probably going to do other stonework. We just don't see it. So I think there's a disparity between that, so that this opens it up. Okay, so if there's a pre-dynastic time in that archaic age, and these vessels were found in these burials, is it possible that those people found them also? They somehow found a cache of them, and I think that if you're a primitive people and you're in the business of making pottery and clay pots to carry water or whatever else around, and you're probably using stone tools to do work with wood and all the rest of it, you find one of these things, you're going to immediately recognize the value it represents, its intrinsic value. You'd be like, this is an artifact. The gods must have made this because it's hard stone. I can't understand how it got in this form. It becomes immediately precious. It filters up through the social structure. It's going to get collected by the people with social power in that organization, and they're probably going to say it's precious to me. Bury it with me.
Yep.
See the same thing happening throughout time. Still happens today, and that's where we find it. So now it's like, oh well, how far back? When could these have possibly been made? These or any of the other artifacts? Now, okay, now we're into this like unknown part of history. We get into really prehistory. And you get into these pre-Diluvian times. We have a real hard time tracing back evidence of humanity and human civilizations prior to the Younger Dryas. Certainly we find fossil remains and we can find very primitive peoples, but nothing with the capability of making this sort of thing. I do think that if they did exist, I think there's, we see echoes of it through these other civilizations, perhaps inherited items, but most of it's been wiped out from the cataclysm. We just got to keep looking. Got to look in the Sahara. We've got to look underwater off the coastal shelves, things like that. I think we should be open-minded to these possibilities and when you combine the extension of the human timeline with the evidence for these massive cataclysms, particularly the Younger Dryas, although by no means that's not the only thing that's happened in the last 100,000 years even. I think it's entirely possible that a civilization that had the capability to make these things for whatever purpose could have existed any time built by humans in that period. Now, I don't know where to land on it. Was it? My intuition says I don't think it was one that was just destroyed by the Younger Dryas. So if you call it Atlantis or whatever, this thing that was just destroyed by cataclysm, the civilization that sank. And I'm not convinced that was the Younger Dryas. So was it 15,000 years ago? I don't know. Maybe it was the Bolling Alarod or the Elder Dryas cataclysms. I think the time spans could be greater than that.
Yeah, there's impact proxies in mammoth material going back 30 like George's tusk.
Yeah.
Has magnetic spherules jammed in it from 30-something thousand years ago. So it's like, yeah. Well, there may have been, and I know you've had Randall on and he talks about this. There may have been, it's not like we have this image because of the dinosaur event, the KT boundary that you have like one massive thing comes in, boom, changes everything. But it's more likely that you get periods of increased bombardment because we're going through like what the huge, massive clock system that is the solar system. Now we move slowly into a period where now we're just passing more frequently past large amounts of material. And so you can have 1,000 years where it's just more likely that stuff's going to come in and blow up in the atmosphere above you and wipe out a whole bunch of stuff, and that would cause massive fluctuations in climate during that period. And then after we get out of the bombardment period, then things have time to settle down, but stuff has gone extinct. You've moved, sometimes whole coastlines. And so, yes, if you had a technological civilization like ours during a period like that, if we moved into one of those periods right now where, say, every couple of years something large exploded, it doesn't even have to hit the ground, just blows up in the atmosphere, an airburst, it is going to like destroy civilization, it over time. You're not going to survive it. And you just go back to being primitive because you lose your infrastructure, you lose your power grid, you lose, everything else. So, yeah, and then if there's large enough geological movements of things like enormous floods, massive tidal waves, and things like that, you lose all your coastal cities, and they're buried under 20 meters of stuff, and there's just nothing left, right? And it would have to be an accident of geology for it to be exposed again later. You know, the whole place has to dry out. It becomes a desert, and then the desert gets some floods, and then it cuts a cliff, and then, wow, look, there's a city sticking out of the cliff, right? And that might not happen for 2 or 3 million years or 50 million years.
Or you're up in a high mountain, like, say, the Andes.
Yeah, right.
Right.
I mean, what did the Egyptian priests say to Solon? You know, how many floods have they witnessed?
Yeah, they're like, the Greeks. The Greeks are young. They remember one destruction. Yeah. We remember 6.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So if they were significantly older, and that could explain why the tool marks are not as pronounced, and why you're not seeing the like the remnants of the tool within the grooves, right? Is that fair? Like all the rubbing over time, the handling over thousands and thousands
potentially,
of years?
I know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
This is why I think it's interesting to do some comparative work, and I probably need to talk to someone who knows a bit more about looking. I don't know if anyone really does look for that sort of evidence in tool marks. Because I don't know at the micro, can you really, if that bit is wet, if something is wedged into that stone as a result of machining, pressing really hard, it's taking this tiniest, like 5 micron size sliver of, you know, whatever metal it is, and wedging it in that stone, is that going to get dislodged by handling or with sand?
I would wonder about oxidation over time and just
that too.
General degradation, right?
Yeah, the metals oxidize, they disappear.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was warned about from one of the from Fayez Bearcat actually was that, so he looks at all of these things, and he's got 100 different ways of telling whether or not they're authentic, and of course, you know, the provenance factors, all but everything. He doesn't sell anything that he thinks is not genuine and authentic. Of course, he's not going to buy it in the first place. And so one of the things for him is the tool marks, and if the tool marks are very pronounced, and if you can rub your finger over the tool marks and kind of feel like you can feel it, you can feel the rib of the tool marks, then it's probably more modern. But his point is, if you can rub your finger on it and it's smooth and the tool marks have kind of been worn away,
like worn down,
then it's much more likely that it has a lot of age to it. And so that's the kind of stuff that he'll stick to. A lot of other things, like in dimensions and like the spinning thing and the, like all of it, you know. But
it's like he's looking for quality. That's If it isn't as good, then it's modern, right? I find that awesome. Like no, the really good stuff is when you know it's the old stuff.
And I get
that
the wear.
Seems like it's backwards.
Right.
I get the wear thing, and that is certainly possible. I'd love to talk to someone who maybe knows more about it. Somebody like you probably know. But no doubt they've been extensively handled, and maybe it is just a case. Maybe we're not seeing.
But this spent $4,000 beneath the step the dollars 4,000 years beneath the step pyramid, not being handled by people or out in the desert being blown by sand. Right? It's sitting down there in a basically stasis. It isn't being rubbed by anything.
Right. So the tool marks, if it was 4,000 years old, the tool marks would probably still be pretty pronounced. But if it was 20,000 years old, the tool marks could be well worn down by now.
Yeah.